What's happening, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Ryan, and today I wanted to talk about 5 tips to keep in mind when color grading your footage. Once you have all of your footage, it's really easy to feel eager to want to just jump right into the edit. I know that I feel like this sometimes, and it's just super exciting because once you have your footage and you get into the editing bay, that's when your story starts to formulate. But it's important to keep a few things in mind. A lot of these tips might feel tedious now, especially if you're just starting out in video editing, but it becomes a really big deal when you're working on bigger film projects and there's a lot of money poured into the project. I wanted to start off by saying I'm not a professional colorist by any means. I have been video editing for over 20 years off and on, and more consistently in the last 6 to 8 years professionally, working on narrative films, TV commercials, and a whole lot of client work. And these are just some of the tips that I've picked up over the years. I also wanted to say that we like to use Premiere Pro. However, these tips will work with any editing software, so no worries if you're using something other than us. I also have a few bonus tips for you, so make sure to stay tuned till the end. Okay, so let's get into it. Tip number 1. Color versus saturation. When viewing a film, the first thing that we tend to notice in terms of visuals are the colors. We might be tempted early on in our careers to add more saturation and more vibrance. But the problem with this is that the visuals start to look unnaturally vibrant, and it can pull the viewer out of the story. But there is a way to make your colors pop without using too much saturation. Let me explain. Okay, so I'm here in my editing bay. It's a little dark right now, and I apologize about the hair. I've been growing it out so I could take a photo for an upcoming project, and now I desperately need a haircut. Anyway, let's get into it. One thing that people don't realize is that you don't have to super saturate your image to make the colors pop. The better way that you could do it would be to darken your colors. One example that I have to kind of demonstrate this would be the Noble spec commercial that we did last year that we published on YouTube. All the scenes that we did with Luke in the gym came out really great. And then there were all the scenes outside with Sarah, which she did an amazing job, but I think I would have color graded things a little bit differently. Also too, I had just gotten the Sony FX3 at the time. Previously to that, I was working with the A7 III, which had S-Log 2. And when I got the FX3, I all of a sudden was color grading with S-Log 3. So I changed up my workflow and I had to get used to color grading with this new color profile. But anyway, going back to this image, this is the opening image in that commercial, and this is what that looks like. You could see right away that a lot of the green here is just super vibrant. There are some days when I go out and film and the greens look very muted, but on this particular day, the greens were very, very bright and vibrant in camera. So if I were to go into the saturation and I were to just boost everything, this is a good example of what I mean by adding too much saturation. It kind of breaks down the image and it could really pull you out of the story. So I'm gonna go to the curves and I'm gonna select those greens. And the way I could do that is I could either select it here or use the eyedropper and select a good part of that green, and I'm gonna pull the green down first. One way that we can make these greens pop still without ultimately taking all of the color out is by darkening the greens. So what we would do for that is we would go to Hue versus Luma, grab the eyedropper tool, find the green that we wanna use, and we would pull it down. Now you wanna be careful when you're doing this because depending on the image quality that you're getting from your camera, it could break this image down quite a bit because there's just not enough information in the color space for us to manipulate the greens like this without it breaking down and it looking terrible. You also want to be careful because there's going to be this yellow color and other things like the street line here or her skin tone. So I'm just gonna do a few more adjustments on this overall image and then I'll show you the difference between the two. And that looks pretty good to me. I'll show you side by side. Just a major difference in the muted colors, and just goes to show you that you don't have to add saturation to make your colors pop, but just mute them a little bit, darken them, and you'll really see the natural saturation and color from these elements within your image pop out of the screen. Using the luminance curve is a great way to make your colors pop without adding too much saturation. Also remember that a lot of this chalks up to just personal preference. There are a lot of films out there that use heavy saturated colors, or at least it seems so. But it's important to remember that these decisions were well thought out and tactfully done with purpose. All right, and tip number 2, less is more. Unless it's not. Early on in all of our careers, we tend to want to add more and more to the image, but sometimes we could add a little too much. The more and more you add to your image, the more the image starts to break down and it looks really bad and you might have to start over, which in turn might bog down your overall workflow. Don't add too much to your image, but it's just as easy to not add enough. If you're working in a log profile, your eyes can get really used to the way that looks and can tell your brain that this is good to go. And then when you go and watch it back a few hours later, you might notice that you might need to add a little more color, a little more depth on the overall image. So it's important to discover the balance for each individual project. Tip number 3, color grade with the lights down. This is something that took me forever to learn, and I actually didn't know this when I first started in my career. I remember making video projects in video editing class back in high school. They had all the lights down and they had lights behind the screens. And I didn't know why that was. It was a lot different back then. We were using tube TVs and TVCRs. Very old school, but somehow they lit it up to where we weren't straining our eyes and it was very comfortable. The one thing that we tend to forget is that light can affect the way we see things. It's really important to remember that you're sitting in front of a screen for hours and hours at a time and your eyes start to strain, which ultimately affects your health, but will also affect the way you see your images. So the first thing I like to do is to turn off all the house lights. The house lights or your office lights, it's gonna be the worst lighting that you can get. However, if you were to turn off all these lights and control the lighting that you have within your editing bay or your office or your home or wherever you are, this is gonna work out great. And what I have behind my screen behind me is called bias lighting. And there's a lot that goes into this, but basically what bias lighting is the light behind your screen to help with eye fatigue. Not only is it gonna help with eye fatigue, but it's also gonna help you to see more accurate colors and accurate contrast within your image. The way that I'm doing it here probably isn't the best way, however it works for me. A lot of colorists like the lighting in their rooms to 6500 Kelvin. I just bought some LED strips, threw them on the back of my desk and set them to white. And this seems to work really well for me. When I'm sitting at my desk, I have a light to the side of me that's very tungsten in color, very warm, and that too affects the way that I see the colors and perceive them in my images. So I usually turn that one off and I only use the bias lighting. I have Govee lighting and I have that all connected to an app, and I have it connected to all the lighting here in the studio. And from this app, I could turn everything on and off and also do a combination of lights that are gonna help me in whatever situation I'm in. It's really important to remember that video takes time to edit, and so does color correction and color grading. So it's really important to give your eyes a rest, but not only for your health, you also want to see your images more accurately. So consider bias lighting the next time you're color grading. One thing of note is to get a decent screen and then calibrate that screen for professional color grading jobs. Right now I'm currently using the LG 32-inch 4K display. However, I'm currently using it in a different way. I originally bought it for color grading, but it just didn't have the backlight that I needed and it wasn't super accurate. But I've used many LG screens in the past and they've always worked great for me, especially when calibrated. So get a monitor that you love and make sure to calibrate your screen. All right, and tip number 4, scopes. I'm not gonna go deep into scopes in this video. There are plenty of videos online about this topic, so make sure and go and check those out. But today I wanted to talk about using them and why it's important. There's a whole lot of inconsistency when you're only using your eyes. Again, going back to light changing from outside or even your computer screen, going back and forth from warm to cool, it can be really difficult to maintain consistency throughout the edit. Okay, so here I am in my home studio. Right now I have my white balance on my camera set to 3000 Kelvin. That's really cool. And this is filmed at 5600 Kelvin, which is daylight. It's a very balanced white balance. And you could just tell the difference right away between the two, and having to switch your color temperature, your white balance between the two, you could totally tell that things start to get a little bit difficult. And these two color temperatures in light from your office or house lights to daylight are very different. And so these two color temperatures can affect your eyes when color grading. And this is why you want to use scopes. Scopes are gonna help you to visually see what your color grade needs without having to rely on your eyes on the image. Anytime that you change the environment of your room, this can mean daylight peeking through the windows. This can mean the type of lighting that you have in your room. Anytime you change those kinds of things, it's going to affect the way that you see the image and the way that you perceive colors in your image. One way to combat this is to use scopes. These are going to give you accurate readings when trying to color correct or color grade your image. Scopes are a really great and reliable tool when trying to get accuracy in your colors. And tip number 5, take breaks. I know this might seem obvious, but most of us aren't taking breaks, and it's hard to maintain consistency and produce your best work when you're not taking care of your own health. Taking breaks is not only for your physical and mental health, but also can help when looking at an image. If you take a break for about an hour, go grab a cup of coffee or lunch with a friend, come back and look at your edit with fresh eyes, you're gonna notice all the different changes that you'll want to make to your edit. But when you're sitting in front of a screen for many, many hours and you're not giving your eyes a rest, your eyes start to get used to the image that you've produced, and your brain tells you that it's good to go, when it might not be. One thing I recommend is finishing an edit at the end of the day, wrapping it up with enough time to come back the next morning and take a look at your edit with fresh eyes. Doing this will save a lot of your projects and save you a lot of time in the long run. So make sure you give your eyes a rest and look at your image with fresh eyes. Okay, and here are a few bonus tips on some of the things that I've picked up over the years when color grading my images. Number one, color correct before you color grade. Color correcting is getting all of your colors accurate, skin tones accurate, and everything else balanced. And then once you have that in place, then you can apply your look, or your LUT, if you've heard that term before, your final look, your final grade, and that's where color grading comes in. Number two, use adjustment layers. There's a lot that goes into this, but using adjustment layers is an opportunity to adjust the color grade all across your edit, not just on one clip. I'd love to go more into some of these things in another video, so let us know in the comments if that's something that you would like for us to do. So that's it, you guys. Thank you so much for joining me in this video about color grading. If you like this video or you learned something, make sure to hit the like button below. Consider subscribing if you haven't already, and we'll see you in the next one. Laters.